This episode of Musical Hell is brought to you by Midnight Musicals. Welcome to the podcast Musical Underground. Thank you. Greetings, mortals. Welcome to another session of the Infernal Court in Musical Hell. I'm Diva, your judge, jury, executioner, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, by popular demand, please welcome our next offender, Dear Evan Hansen. To say this musical is divisive is like saying the Titanic has some water damage. Full disclosure, I am very firmly in the detractor camp, in no small part because I will never understand how it raked the Tonys in hand over fist in a season that had both one of the most innovative scores of the 21st century and a brilliantly directed 9/11 story that manages to avoid both overwrought sentiment and strident jingoism. But I will concede that the Dear Evan Hansen fanbase deserved a better film adaptation than this one, which seems largely to exist because producer Mark Platt wanted to give his son and original Evan Hansen Ben Platt a star vehicle. Trust me, I know all about being let down by the Hollywood version of a show you adore in defiance of its critics. And I hope that by subjecting it to my particular brand of Hearfire, you may find some solace. So without further ado, let us at long last examine the case of Dear Evan Hansen. Right off the bat, we get a title drop as Evan writes an encouraging letter to himself as a therapy exercise. Given how quickly it derails, it doesn't seem to be working.
But also confident. That's important. And interesting. Easy to talk to, approachable. But mostly just be yourself. You know, that's number one, obviously. Be yourself. But like a confident version of yourself. Like approachable and interesting.
Evan is starting his senior year in high school, and he has a broken arm and social anxiety so crippling that talking to the pizza delivery guy is a daunting task. He also has a solo that was not the opening number on stage, but it's one of the more popular songs in the score, so we're running with it.
On the outside, always looking in, will I ever be more than I've always been? 'Cause I'm tapping on the glass, waving through a window.
And we're instantly running into two sins that need to be addressed. The first is the song, Waving Through a Window, or more specifically, how it's edited. Those of you who are performers may be familiar with the axiom that if a phrase is repeated, there needs to be a change in this presentation. Director Steven Chbosky seems to have taken that to heart, resulting in rapid cuts that do not fit the mood of the song. He also does a poor job of visually conveying the isolation and alienation that Evan expresses. Compare this with John M. Chu's direction of In the Heights opening number, where Usnavi expresses similar detachment, coincidentally also while looking through a window. The gradual zoom in and the dancers reflected in the glass which serves as a barrier create an instantly striking image and a sense of entrapment. Meanwhile, these shots in the school corridor look like nobody told Ben Platt what the extras would be doing, and he's trying to work around them as best he can. And speaking of Ben Platt, he's our sin number 2. Much like Christopher Columbus's adaptation of Rent, Dear Evan Hansen created a stir by casting its original Broadway lead, despite him being a full decade older than Evan's 17. Now, 20-somethings have long been cast as high school students in film and television, and for several valid reasons. They're more experienced and developed as performers, their bodies are not subject to the rapid changes of adolescence, they're not bound by the restrictions placed on child labor, and it's less icky if they're called upon to play scenes with more mature content. But Ben Platt never really reads as a teenager on screen. The way he scrunches up his face when Evan is unhappy or distressed, which are pretty much the character's default states, make him look even older than he is. Not since Grease has there been a more unconvincing high school student on film. And that maturity makes the gray areas of the character harder to swallow. And yes, we will get to that in good time. The start of school pep rally provides some exposition on the cause of Evan's broken arm. He fell out of a tree, basically, and introduces the supporting cast members. Evan's crush, Zoe Murphy, his somewhat reluctant friend Jared, the class overachiever Alana, and Zoe's older brother Connor, whose vaguely goth style and antisocial tendencies make him an even bigger social pariah than Evan. Although his lashing out does provide an opening for Zoe to show a little sympathy towards Evan, which he immediately whiffs.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, it's Evan. I'm sorry.
Why are you sorry?
Because you said Evan and then I said it. You know, I just repeated it, which is, that's just really annoying when people do that.
Later in the school library, Evan's therapy letter turns into a self-pitying ramble with overtones of suicidal ideation, which he accidentally prints out. I'm not sure how you accidentally do something that normally takes multiple deliberate steps, but hey, this story needs an inciting incident. Connor is also present and makes some sympathetic overtures towards Evan's broken arm.
Wow. That's great.
Now we can both pretend we have friends.
But the attempt at camaraderie goes south when Connor finds Evan's letter, which dwells rather too much on Connor's little sister for his comfort. He storms off, taking the letter with him, and Evan has a panic attack thinking about the social media humiliation he is certain will follow. But Connor does nothing. In fact, he disappears from school entirely for several days, and it's only when Evan is called to the principal's office and meets Connor's mom Cynthia and stepdad Larry that things come to a head.
These are the words that he wanted to share with you.
His last words. Connor took his own life.
See, because Evan signed his note, "Sincerely Me," Cynthia and Larry are convinced that the note was from Connor to Evan, and seeing Connor's name on Evan's cast convinces Cynthia that the two had a close friendship. Evan attempts to explain, first in the principal's office, then at dinner with the Murphys later, but is hampered by his crippling lack of communication skills and Cynthia being very firmly in the denial stage of Kubler-Ross.
We didn't find anything from you.
Yeah, no, I know.
He set up different accounts, ones we couldn't find. He knew you read his emails.
And also by sin number 3, a hefty dose of narrative convenience. As with most plots relying on a central ruse, this one goes to great lengths to make said ruse possible and to prevent it from being quickly cleared up, but the story doesn't quite have the skill or style to make us buy into that. In this case, Evan's half-mumbled comments about trees convinces Cynthia that the two boys were spending time at an old apple orchard where the Murphys used to picnic, and Evan works her prompts into a trademark Pace-Gimple inspirational ballad like a psychic doing a cold reading.
All we see is sky for forever. Let the world pass by for forever.
Zoe seems less than convinced, but her parents are delighted, and Evan decides to run with it, bribing Jared $20 to create a fake cyber trail of his and Connor's friendship.
All you gotta do is just believe you can be who you wanna be. Sincerely me.
Shabosky doesn't quite push the irony in this song as much as I would like, but it is a step in the right direction after the weirdness that was waving through a window.
'Cause all that it takes is a little rain. It's easy to change if within your core of attention.
At least until he decided to film his actors facing away from the camera with poor lighting and a worse sound mix. Cynthia is comforted by Connor's emails, but Larry is less interested, and Zoe is angry because Connor's violent outbursts have left her with trauma she can't get anybody to acknowledge, all of which is processed during one of the score's better songs.
I will sing no requiem tonight. Why should I have a heavy heart? Why should I say I'll keep you with me?
The more I know about them, the more I wish the Murphys were the central characters of this movie. Larry means well but lacks the emotional skill set to handle Connor's issues or the fallout from his suicide. Cynthia is trying desperately to rehabilitate the memory of a son she loved but couldn't help or save, creating a version of his story that makes her feel less like a failure. And Zoe's needs and feelings have long been sidelined by her older brother's drama, and his death has only made that worse. They're all rather shortchanged, but I'm giving a special shout out to the criminal underuse of Amy Adams, who is bringing nuanced character work and solid singing chops to an underdeveloped role that barely allows her to sing. Evan's mom, Heidi, is a single parent whose long shifts as a nurse keep her away from the house much of the time, so it takes her a while to address the subject of the boy who signed Evan's cast right before killing himself. Evan lies to keep Heidi at a distance, just as he's lying to get in with the Murphys, and I'm starting to think his mental space has less to do with neurodivergence and more to do with the I accuse my parents mobile.
Hey, they're stupid! Really big!
But his social life is improving as Zoe invites him to sample her mom's gluten-free apple pie. Not a great alternative to the Taco Tuesday Heidi had to postpone, but it does enable him to bond with Zoe over family dysfunction. His dad walked out on him when he was 7, and his mom struggles to make ends meet. Her dad died when she was a toddler, and her mom is a trend-chasing, bored suburban housewife.
Why did he write that in his note? I don't even know her, but if I could just talk to her. We weren't close at all. Not since we were kids. He never noticed anything about me.
It's not true.
And for those of you who find it a bit creepy that Evan's parlaying his theoretical relationship with Connor into some personal time with the girl he's worshipped from afar, this next song will not help.
He thought it looked pretty cool when you put indigo streaks in your hair.
No fucking way.
Musicals have a long tradition of songs where a character describes their feelings for someone in a roundabout way, so having Evan reverse Cyrano his way into confessing his feelings to Zoe seems like a good idea on paper, even if he is putting words in the mouth of her dead brother. But the lack of chemistry between the characters knocks it firmly into sin number 5 territory. Evan is practically swimming in female attention by this point, as Alana is also reaching out to him about speaking at the school memorial for Connor and starting a mental health awareness program in his name. She also deals with anxiety and depression, albeit to a lesser degree if their medication comparison is any indication, and makes a serious bid for would be a much better lead character with her song about mental illness and visibility.
So nobody can know just what the cracks might show, how deep and dark they go.
The Murphys give their blessing to the Connor project, and Cynthia gifts Evan one of Connor's old ties for the memorial, so now Evan must face the greatest horror of all, public speaking. I'm not even joking. There's a reason you only see me as a still image.
I lay there on the ground, and good morning, students and faculty. Sorry, that's too much.
Evan appears to be headed straight to a viral epic fail video, but with an encouraging nod from Cynthia, he pulls it together to the point of not needing his notes or even the microphone anymore.
Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken on the ground, you will be found.
Now would be a good time to talk about what I consider the central flaw of this musical. Much has been said on the ethics of Evan's behavior and how much his obvious but never clearly defined neurodivergence explains or mitigates the fact that he essentially exploits a family's trauma to gain validation from parental figures and the attention of the girl he likes. Honestly, I think you can make arguments either way on this. Evan's behavior does feel icky in places. Ben Platt looking older than his co-stars does not help in this case. But he's hardly the first music theater protagonist to exhibit moral failings, and while the book's efforts on confronting his behavior and having him atone for it are imperfect, an attempt is made. But I believe the reason why Dear Evan Hansen sits wrong with so many, including myself, is a fundamental disconnect between the feel of the music and the story it is trying to tell. Take Evan's anthem, You Will Be Found, an inspiring assurance that helping hands are nearby and no one is alone and all that. It's also a lie, a very comforting lie and one that provides solace to those who hear it, but nevertheless a fiction based on a version of Connor Murphy that exists only in Evan's imagination. And that would be fine if the musical explored that dichotomy, but it never does. Pasek and Paul's music treats Evan's false friendship with Connor as if it were real, their tunes as sincere and sentimental as a flowery greeting card. There's no edges or irony to be found. Even pop composers like Andrew Lloyd Webber, Frank Wildhorn, and Stephen Schwartz are able to work elements of darkness into their material, if occasionally in a romanticized sense. But because Evan's deception is presented musically as something genuine, the audience is left to assume that the writers don't fully recognize the gray area he inhabits. It doesn't help that Evan, who in spoken dialogue struggles to carry a basic conversation, suddenly becomes confident and poetic whenever the music starts up. It makes him feel phony. This is a character who needs the stream of conscious struggles of Fun Home, or the private interior monologues of Spring Awakening, not Pasek and Paul's Park and Bark power ballads. Evan's cast comes off and he reaps the benefits of internet fame, especially with Zoe, as Alana announces a Kickstarter campaign to renovate the old apple orchard in Connor's name. But there are downsides too, as all the increased attention makes Evan queasy and he's forced to endure Larry's attempts at male bonding. Meanwhile, Heidi sees Evan's viral video and is concerned because she knows Evan has been lying to her, even if she's not exactly sure what he's been lying about, and also he's been skipping his therapy appointments and sticking her with the no-show fees. Evan responds by implying the shitty labor-unfriendly work culture in America is somehow all his mom's fault.
So when were you planning on telling me any of this?
Why would I tell you exactly? When are you even here?
I'm here now.
Okay.
The overall debate on whether or not Evan is a sympathetic character will probably continue until Gabriel's big solo engagement, but the way he takes things out on Heidi is where I personally draw the line. Zoe visits Evan at his home and is shocked to discover that a kid with a single mom might not be able to afford the crippling cost of higher education. But mostly she wants to have a conversation that doesn't center around her dead brother for once.
What if it's us? What if it's us and only us?
Evan and Zoe's love duet, Only Us, is sin number 8 and really the song that feels the most false to me. Not much of what we've seen of these two leads me to believe she's attracted to him, let alone why she might be attracted to him. Yes, the socially awkward deserve love too and are perfectly capable of forming meaningful relationships. But really, what does Zoe and Evan have that isn't directly related to her brother's suicide and Evan's ensuing charade? Laughing at her mom's bad pie?
It's not so impossible. Nobody else but the two of us here. 'Cause you're saying it's possible.
Even the lyrics don't seem to quite believe what they're selling, and the montage of prom night and amusement park rides is a pretty poor substitute for the rapport that should have been developing over the past hour or so. Evan's newfound amour has him blowing off his mom, Jared, and even Alana and the Connor Project meetings, which means it's time for some third act complications, coming in the form of Heidi meeting with the Murphys and being generally put off by the class divide.
Fascinating story about the wine. It's from a vineyard in Napa, and the entire growing process from start to finish, 100% sustainable.
The final straw comes when the Murphys offer to give Evan the college money they had set aside for Connor, and Heidi deeply resents the condescending charity and general attempts to insinuate themselves into Evan's life. And Evan deeply resents his mom trying to get him the medication and therapy that might help him, instead of living a life of middle-class suburban dysfunction.
You are the best thing. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Sorry, I can't give you anything more than that.
It's not my fault if other people can.
What an asshole.
Meanwhile, the Orchard Kickstarter ends in 2 days and is still several $1,000s short, which is making Alana rather nervous. She's also started getting suspicious about Evan's story, as the dates on the fake emails Jared whipped up don't line up with when Evan actually broke his arm. In too deep at this point to admit to Alana she's run a crowdfunding campaign based on a lie, Evan provides her with his original letter in hopes it will convince her.
Only his family has seen this, okay? You can't show it to anybody else, okay?
Now, remember when I said there is some attempt to hold Evan accountable for his behavior? The problem is, before we get to that, we have to go through this part. Because, of course, Alana disregards Evan's wishes and posts his letter to social media in a last-ditch effort to boost the Kickstarter, and although a reprise of her solo, The Anonymous Ones, indicates she has good intentions, it still feels like an obvious plot device designed to absolve Evan of responsibility for his actions and the fallout that ultimately results as much as possible. Because although Alana does get her funding, the ever-burning trash fire that is the internet declares Connor's note as evidence of his parents' neglect and general horribleness. I mean, fair enough on that, they do still have that college fund after all. The stress from the harassment causes Cynthia and Larry to turn on each other until Evan shows up and finally comes clean, in a number that feels like it's trying to make him the real victim in all this.
I guess I thought I could be part of this. I never had this kind of thing before.
Although Cynthia refuses to reveal the truth out of fear that Evan will harm himself, she tells him to leave her house, and Zoe obviously doesn't want anything more to do with him. All of this causes Evan to have choppy flashbacks to his arm-breaking fall, revealed to be his own botched suicide attempt, while Ben Platt looks more and more like he drank out of the false grail.
I never let them see the worst of me.
Heidi comes home to find Evan curled up and crying in the dark, and I'm not sure if she gets the truth through him or catches the social media scuttlebutt and figures it out from there, but the two of them are finally on the same page. In a scene that deserves to emerge from a much better plot line, Evan confesses his feelings of self-loathing and brokenness, and Heidi reassures him in a song that once again proves any character in this movie would be a better central character than its actual central character.
And the house felt so big, and I felt so small.
Evan confesses everything on social media and tells people to lay off the Murphys, which puts an end to that, I guess. And he decides to make an effort to learn about the real Connor, mostly through his 9th grade reading list and internet stalking Connor's fellow rehab inmates. The latter does yield fruit in the form of a video of Connor playing music for group therapy, which he sends to the Murphys, Jared, and Alana in an atonement of sorts.
Today, what felt so far away feels a little closer.
And, well, that's about it, really. Zoe invites Evan to the new Connor Murphy Memorial Orchard. Hope they didn't blow the entire $100,000 on the sign. Where they catch up and have some bittersweet what-might-have-beens before parting. And Evan writes one more letter to himself, this one filled with some boilerplate motivational talk. Which I guess is an improvement.
Just hold on and keep going. Just keep going.
The biggest problem with Dear Evan Hansen is, ironically, Evan Hansen himself. He's never as compelling or as sympathetic as the people around him, and the musical is so determined to have us on his side that it never really sits with the questions or issues raised by his story. It doesn't help that Pasek and Paul's score, in their standard uplifting mode, is at odds with the darker elements intrinsic in the book. So the court of musical hell condemns them to have the difficult times in their lives serenaded by Barney the dinosaur. So let it be recorded. This session of the Infernal Court in musical hell is now adjourned.